Hi, thanks, Scott. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the tool that we've developed. Talk a little bit about the what we're calling the Eastern Ontario farm model, or just the farm model if you happen to not be in Eastern Ontario. So a little on why we decided to go this route. And part of it's kind of getting past those generalizations that Scott was talking about. So, you know, in general, the temperature is increasing, the precipitation is increasing, getting more variable, potentially more extremes. So earlier springs, earlier seeding perhaps, later falls, these are all possibilities that are out there, but what does it actually mean on a day-to-day basis for farms in the region? Basically, all this equals changing weather patterns. Now, agriculture is basically a transplantation of European methods into North American conditions, and over generations, they have basically adjusted and adapted to weather patterns as they currently exist. So as those patterns change, that's going to require adaptations into the future. So knowing how those some of the possibilities and how those weather patterns might change would be useful in trying to plan into the future and on how we might need to change agriculture. So the question, how do we look at that critically? Look critically at how changing weather patterns affect farms. So, for example, if we talk about those generalizations, if these two situations here are the first day of the growing season according to the climate generations, obviously that's not the start of the growing season for the crop that you're trying to grow because you can't get the crop in the ground. So we need to be crop specific with our evaluations. So we looked at corn, soy, and alfalfa as our because that's what's in our region for the most part. Spatially explicit, the varied weather across the region, and also operationally sensitive. So on a day-to-day basis, how does weather affect farms? Essentially what we're doing, we're playing the farming game, but we're playing it over 2,800 times in Eastern Ontario. We have individual farms that react to these farms across the region. As Scott alluded to earlier, the study area, this is the actual modeled study area. So the city of Ottawa, which consists of quite a bit of agricultural land, the county of Prescott-Russell, or combined counties of Prescott-Russell, and combined counties of Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry. Agricultural systems in Eastern Ontario are largely, or primarily dairy, field crop or cash crop, beef. There's some pigs and there's some poultry in the region. There's also principally the crops are corn, soy, cereals, and perennial hay. That's the largest acreages in the region. Okay, and I haven't been telling you when I'm changing the slide. So I'm on the slide that says Envision Eastern Ontario Model. I don't know what number it is, but...
You lost your slides. It's on just a general Carlton slide.
Oh.
What happened?
Okay. And our technician just left the room.
Exactly.
I'm really going to touch this.
Okay. It jumped back to your interest line?
What? Okay, sorry about that.
Yeah, that's cool.
How are we? Okay. So within the model itself, the Envision model, we have 2,844 farms with 22 different types, and I'll talk a little bit about how we got to farm types. but basically they are based on the Census of Agriculture statistics from 2011. They are spatially distributed on the landscape, and they're of average, at least the starting point of them is average farm sizes. And it's important to note that they're not real farms, they're not in real locations. This is, I like to say, a fictional tale based on a true story. The weather and farming operations, they follow a daily time step. We have maximum and minimum temperature and precipitation events happening daily. Crops develop based on a heat unit-based growth curve. For the most part, soy follows a slightly different curve than that. There are two classes of data, fields and farms. Fields are the integrated decision units, which is the unit that the model itself, the model framework uses. The IDUs are based on the AFC crop cover data from 2011. We've taken that raster data and created polygons with that. So we've set the field boundaries in time. They do get modified through some of Tanya's work as time goes on, but for the most part, we have set those field boundaries. The fields are then grouped based on legal survey polygons, so cadastral polygons. So that becomes an ownership unit. One cadastral polygon would be owned by a farmer. And farms are collections of those cadastral polygons and all of the fields that are involved with each of those polygons. Farm types. Stats Canada classifies all farms based on the North American Industry Classification System, or the NAICS system. So basically what that is the principal commodity that the farm produces on a given year determines its farm classification. So a farm that makes most of its money from corn would become a corn farm. Now the second level of that groups those, so it would be field crop, beef, dairy, into those a grouping of classifications. If you use just the NAICS classification system in the Stats Canada, you get a lot of suppression of data. So Dr. Ted Huffman worked with Stats Canada to develop what we're calling the Ag Canada, or the Agriculture Ag Canada classification system that reduces or minimizes the amount of suppression of that data, so we can get most out of the data as we can. So that gives us 8 classifications. We decided that we wanted to get a little more specific with that if we could, and what we did was we keyed on the field crop farms and the livestock components of some of those farms in order to create groupings of classifications that were a little more descriptive. So in this example we have field crop farms in Stormont, Dundas, Glengarry. There's 725. 29 of those farms report having dairy cows. So therefore we have 29 field crop dairy farms and 29 less straight field crop farms. Similarly with hogs, we combine sows, weaners, and growers to get 7 hog farms reporting. And therefore 7 field crop and hogs, and whatever is left over becomes the field crop only farm. Then we went through some geomatics wizardry that SAMHSA put together for us. We turned that data into actual farms on the ground. And what we did with that was the consolidated census subdivision, which is basically a county in this area, would tell us how many of a particular farm type would be in that county. We area weighted the soil landscapes of Canada polygons within each of those counties to get a distribution of where the herds are. We have ag census data by soil landscape of Canada regions, so we can start to, and again, we focused on the herds and the livestock component of this. We determined where within that county those herds would be based on the soil landscapes of Canada, Ag Census data, and then we basically randomly generated headquarters for those farms of those particular types on a particular land cover class that made sense for that, and then drop those onto those IDUs to create the headquarters within a cadastre that made sense in order to create an individual farm. So there's an example of a dairy and field crop farm. The headquarters is in yellow. For those of you who are following along the slides, we're on individual farm slide. Sorry, I haven't been telling you when to switch. And basically, it is a farm that combines 3 cadastre polygons and all of the fields in those polygons. And when we look at the distribution, so I changed slides to Eastern Ontario farm types. This is the distribution of those farm types across the study area, and for the most part, they seem to make sense. When we look back at the census data by SLC and by CCS, we do get numbers that they're not right on the numbers from the census data, but they're pretty close to it. So we have that fictional tale based on that true story. The weather data that we have this is a lot of the work that Anna did for us. We have observed data from 1961 to 2010 for 6 weather stations. Each of those weather stations represents the weather within an eco-district. So eco-district being a number of soil landscapes of Canada polygons combined together. It's a similar landscape and it's a similar climate. They're part of Canada's eco-stratification of ecosystems. So we have the weather data by those weather stations, observed data, and then we downscaled global climate models to those weather stations. So we have 30 years into the future. So in total, we have 80 years of the model run that we can look at data. The way the model runs, we have targeted planting dates for crops, cereal April 15th, corn May 1st, soy May 10th. We try to plant, so each of the farms will look at a field and try to plant on that day. The planting is delayed by weather events, wet weather, and essentially farmers can seed up to 100 acres per day in order to get their fields planted. Some of the critical periods during seeding, green up, which is the start of operations, seeding delays, lost days of operation, we call them during seeding. And we also have changes in intended crop as a result of delays. And we saw some of that this year where farmers were turning in their corn because it was just getting too late to seed corn, switching over to soy. So, yay me, I predicted that one right. Essentially what the model does, it runs through a number of decision points where it makes a decision whether they can seed today or not, runs through some loops, gets everything seeded, planted, grown, and harvested at the end of the year. And then the next year starts out again. So some of the data that we're getting, and we're just starting to actually get into some of the analysis of some of this, but a couple of things I thought I'd talk about, and Anna's presentation that Scott will give later it talks a little bit more on some of these points. So weather impacts, so seeding date. So we looked at the average earliest cereal seeding date. Remember that we try to target April 15th as the first day of seeding, and we can see that April 16th, or day 106, We can see that in the past, so the red lines are the observed data from 61 to 2011. Essentially what we did is we took all of our farms, took them back to 1961, which is completely false because farming was very different in 1961 than it is today. But we ran them forward to see when, to be able to compare the past to what the projected data is in the future. And we can see that in April 16th, we can see for the most part was a good day. There were some delays of a few days. The projected data into the future, there's 3 different models there. And we can see that on some of those years we get some fairly significant delays in seeding. Other years, there seems to be a lot more variability, especially in some of the models as far as the delays. We did the same thing for corn. With similar results. Again, you can see that even in the past there were some delays within the corn seeding dates. A little more frequency and maybe perhaps larger delays on the corn. Same thing with soy. So soy being a little more delays even in the past. So May being a wet month. Some other data that we've done or analysis we've done. We took all of the average planting dates for all of the crops just to see what the average planting date was. So historically, May 1st, you can start to see a line. There's a lot of variability within this. And this also shows you the variability across the region. So each of these boxes is a weather station in the weather data. The blue dots are actually outliers from the data. So some of the fields were significantly delayed, even in the historic data. But May 1st there's a line there that shows that on a lot of years, May 1st is the year that everything gets planted. When we look at one of the models, we look at, and we notice that there's actually a 10-day delay where that line starts to set up at May 10th for the most part across the line. So future direction, what we'd like to do some more with developing this model. We don't do much with livestock right now. In fact, the livestock are just very happily placed on the farm, and they happily go through their lives, and we don't really know much about them. So we'd like to build some impacts into the livestock. Improve how we deal with wet soil, improve how we deal with seeding delays, and build some more modeling into that based on different soil types within the region. Scott has talked about gridded weather data as a possibility to see what that would do and how that might improve the analysis. Improve how we seed. Talk about bare soil and when erosion might be happening. So to be able to calculate the soil erosion is another aspect of this, and then better yield information is another thing that we'd like to build. So that's a quick overview of the model, how we put it together. We'll go into quite a bit more detail on July 26th, the next webinar, whenever it comes out. Is there any questions or comments? Pierre?
You back up a few slides, you had all the weather stations, and then there was some that were pretty clean in terms of outliers. I think it was Kempville and Ottawa. Yeah, I think it's this slide here. So is this in fact saying that in Kempville and Ottawa we have pretty consistent weather compared to Cornwall and St. Albert and Russell, where there seems to be a lot more outliers?
That's what the data would.
Although it's the intersection of the weather data with what fields are out there and how many fields had to be seeded and so on. So it's a combined effect of the weather with the map of possible places to be seeded.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
so is it possible that there were more fields that needed to be seeded in those areas, and that had an impact on what the graph looked like?
it could be. We haven't really
Yeah, we've had
figured out the why at this point, but
Yeah, it just seems that the two in the upper left seem really clean, right?
yeah.
Anyway, just an observation. It's interesting.
Other comments, questions online?
I don't think you can hear me, can you?
Yep.
Well, you
I have a
can.
question here. It's Mafra Guelph.
Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello, Lamar for Guelph. You had a question?
Just a question regarding, could you give us an example, like would you see this as being used at a specific farm operation level once the tool is further developed and calibrated and all of that, or more as a regional decision-making tool, or really applicable to farm operations? I mean, it's sounding like to me. What's your thinking?
It could be, and we have talked to farmers and presented this to farmers in Chesterville a couple of months ago. I guess their thought is they could see perhaps looking at this from their own farm situation, but farmers are not generally looking 30 years in advance on some of these things. But to be able to start to look at what some of the potential possibilities would be into the future, and start to think about how they may have to change perhaps their choice of varieties, those things, and what they might be wanting to look at in varieties. I could perhaps see that, but it's probably more at the regional level or
Sector sort of level, and I guess that's how typically we've been thinking of it. But I mean, what you're showing is kind of making me wonder if it, could have other uses as well.
Can I follow up on that?
yeah. Scott?
So at the meeting we had with producers a few months ago, I mean, everybody there was wearing multiple hats, so they almost, maybe all of them did run their own farm, but they were also there representing one of the soil and crop improvement associations or an OFA or whatever. And I got the take-home message that there, maybe once it's documented and it runs smoothly and so on, then associations might find it a useful tool to set up on their own. But overall, and definitely at this stage, they're more interested in the findings that we have in the summary figures and so on. I agree that it does get down into details of operations on a farm, but they are synthetic farms, and I guess could be set up instead to run on realistic farms and in a more restricted spatial setup. But what Dan and I have talked about as maybe being more useful is transitioning to this into something that you could pick, say, on a website, different model farms, and the farmer could pick, this is closest to what I have, and go through and see what the future might have in store for a farm like mine. That might be a better way to take it to individual farm level.
And from the sector side of things, I mean, we haven't gone into different varieties at this point, but each of the varieties would have different. So if you looked at, for example, if the soy growers wanted to look at this and put a number of different varieties or groupings of varieties that are more sensitive to different aspects of weather, you could actually look at this and say, what happens if everybody grows this variety? Or you could look at it as comparing those kinds of things as well. I think there's a number of different ways we could look at this. I think the power of it is more being able to vary the seeding dates based on the weather, and see how some of those growth curves could affect differences in growth curves could affect outcomes
Right.
later on. Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, it's here from A Canada and in Guelph. Just following up on that point, Dan. Wondering if it is possible to take that seeding date information through to yield outcomes. Like, is there part of the program that is modeling that's able to do that? So if you planted, a week later, what impact is that on ultimate yields harvested and/or the weather conditions at harvest, and if that's your chance to even get it off is being affected by climate?
But we do have the harvest operations are modeled into this as well. So it's basically it's delays based on wet weather and those types of situations. We do have some delays in the seeding side of things based on a calculation of soil conditions, but we need to build. That's part of the future direction is to be a little more specific with different soil types, those sorts of things.
We do a penalty. Every time there's a delay, there's a penalty taken from the literature.
Yeah, and each of those delays, as far as the yield go, right now we mostly focus on yield reduction at the end of the year and not necessarily on yield projections, because those are a little tougher to put together.
More variable.
Yeah.
And one other question was just, in terms of running this model, like you've got the data set, I guess, based on the 2011 census information. Like, is it very hard to update the inputs and or weather to run this? I guess how many scenarios can you kind of run easily and in the future? Is this something that takes years to work through now, or are you sort of at a monthly kind of operational type thing?
Well, the data sets are. I mean, it's projected data based on the climate models, and most of the climate models would go to the 2011 would be the start of most of those models at this point.
That's what we.
The observed data only goes up to 2010 for the most part. How long does it take to put those together? Not a huge. I think it's probably talking about months rather than years for the most part. But to build in some of the new functionability for different farm operations, those things might take a little bit longer. Right now, it's a fairly simple depiction of what happens out there, but we could make it more complicated as well.
Yeah, but given it's 2010,
can I step in I'd like to make a comment about this, if I may.
Okay, go ahead, Ruth.
So, just in response to this, I didn't catch the name of this lady from Guelph who's asking the question. I think Anna's presentation on the phenological considerations is going to address in part what you're getting at, because what Dan is showing is simply how the seeding data is affected, but the phenological indicators consider different types of extreme weather effects at different developmental stages for the crops. So that is considered, and you'll see that in a slide, I think, after the break. The other thing with the climate data is until a new climate models are released, the ones that we're using are already loaded in. So I'm not sure if that's what you were referring to, but right now the climate model data is all there in the system.
Yeah, that helps. Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah.
Other questions, comments?
This is Rajiv from Guelph, Mafra. So you talked about delay in seeding date. Wet weather is being cited as a reason. What's happening here? Is it we are getting more precipitation in the early of the year, or is it total precipitation in the year is increasing as well as changing in the precipitation distribution?
Well, some of the models predict, and it kind of depends on which model you're looking at too. So some of the models are more biased towards wetter, and some are more biased towards drier. So, and it's part of the issue with some of these models is there's a wide variety of them, and usually what happens is they combine them all together in an ensemble sort of a prediction, but that takes out your highs and your lows. So basically what we've done is looked at each of the models individually, the model output. So you can get some years where you're going to get, or some models that are going to give you much wetter in May, for example, and some that would be even drier in May. So it kind of depends on which model you're looking at and what the bias of that model actually is.
And again, in Anna's presentation, we'll have some more examples of this, including what's happened in the historical record.
Yeah, you'll see some of the results of this in Anna's presentation after the break.
And sorry, I stepped out for a minute, so maybe you already said this, but are the models from AR4 or AR5?
AR5.
Okay, great. Thanks.
It's 8.5 as well.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Okay.
If that's everything, I'll step down, and I think the next part of it is